Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Weekly Defense Podcast. This week brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Raytheon Missiles and Defense. I'm your host, Noemi Di Stefano, and with me today are our land reporter, Flavia Camargos Pereira, joining us from the US. Hi, Flavia.
Hello, Noemi. Hi, all.
Our news editor, Ben Vogel. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Noemi. Nice to be back.
Great to have you back, Ben. Trevor Nash at the military training desk.
Thank you, Noemi.
And to cover all things naval, we have Harry Lai. Hello to you too, Harry.
Hey, Noemi.
So, full house this week. Well, actually almost missing Tim Martin for sure. But certainly there is a good number of us. And the reason why there are so many people is because, of course, we have a lot to cover. And just to give our listeners an idea of what to expect in the next 45 minutes or so, we will start with some top stories from the past 7 days across the various domains. We will delve into the UK Public Accounts Committee report. And in the second part of the show, we will discuss all the news from the Asia Pacific with a focus on the Pentagon's 2021 China military power report. Now, let's start from Europe and look at some of the news from the land domain first. Flavia, there have been some updates from the Czech MOD regarding the infantry fighting vehicle acquisition program. A recent statement revealed that the three competitors, BAE Systems, Hägglunds, General Dynamics, and Rheinmetall, failed to meet the initial requirements of the IFV program. So what happened there? What were the requirements that they failed to meet, and why?
Yeah, actually, the MOD says they couldn't meet all the requirements they have. Their offers were accessed by a 15-member commissions, and they spoke in terms of the requirements that the companies didn't meet. This commission spoke only in general terms. They didn't disclose details on specific platforms or suppliers. They claimed that there were shortcomings related to missing or inaccurate data on technical characteristics of the vehicles. And this committee also pointed out that there was incomplete information related to the cooperation with the Czech defense industry, which was a requirement as well to involve the national industry in this program. The three companies competing in this program, they didn't meet everything that the Czech MOD expected. I think it's interesting to highlight BAE Systems is competing with the CV9, General Dynamics European Land System with SCOD, and the German Rheinmetall is competing with the Lynx. I reached out to the three companies just to know their thoughts on this process, what they expected in terms of the future of this process. And BAE System Press Service said the company is prepared to continue in the competition and will clearly explain any uncertainties highlighted, by the MOD. And BAE System also pointed out that the CV9, it meets all the key requirements, and they said their offer exceeds the industrial cooperation requirements. Rheinmetall Press Service claimed the company would not issue a statement for reasons of public procurement law, and General Dynamics could not provide comments before we record this podcast.
Okay, I think this is not the first time that this program suffers from hiccups. I think it was last year in spring in 2020 that there were some issues already that we reported on related to this program, right?
Yeah, actually, in April last year, the Czech Republic considered delaying or even canceling this program due to the COVID-19 outbreak and the impact on the country. At that time, this procurement had been put in some doubt by the Prime Minister. He said at the time that the Czech people needed other things for the coronavirus war. They didn't need military vehicles at that point. And in order to move this acquisition forward, the MOD delayed the original planned final deliveries. Initially, the final deliveries would take place in 2025, and they were postponed to 2027. And the country also changed the payments. Initially, the Czech Republic planned to pay for the vehicles by 2026 and postponed it by 2028. I think it's interesting to highlight this procurement program has an estimated value of around $2 billion. And the Czech Republic intended initially to have the contract signed this year in 2021. And for sure, the fact they will not sign the contract this year, for sure it will impact the mobility of the Czech army. I think we have to take into account that these IFVs, they were planned to replace the BVP-2 and the T-72 fleet. The BVP-2 entered service with the Soviet army in 1908. So let's say it's an old platform and it's kind of obsolete as well. And if the country does not make progress with this process, with this program soon, it means they will need to operate obsolete platforms for more years, even more.
Okay, but so the program now has been suspended, but to your knowledge, what is the next step what is the Czech MOD planning to do next? Like, apart from having the option of extending the life of old platforms, how do they plan on fixing this issue?
Yeah, actually, the Czech MOD, they didn't provide details on what they are planning to do to keep the old platforms or working, or to kind of move forward with the current acquisition. Actually, what they say is the future of the program will be decided by the next Ministry of Defense, who will also define what will be the next steps in this process. So at this point, the MOD is reassessing the procurement strategy, the procurement process, and the program has not been canceled. Neither the companies or the platforms disqualified, but the MOD is kind of analyzing what to do.
Okay. Thank you, Flavia. We will stay tuned on this program, of course, and I will be back to you later. Trevor, time for a quick stop at your desk. So a few updates on the UK training front from you. So tell us what's new this week.
We've got a couple of stories up there. One is on the military flight training system program in the UK. There are a couple of little things that are going on there. The first one is that they'd originally changed their system for allowing pilots to plan their flights, flight planning and mission planning system. They began replacing that on the T6 fleet with the Inspire Gecko system, and now they're advancing that program to replace their current mission planning system on the Phenom, the Tutor, and the two rotary wing training aircraft, the H135 and H145. The other MFTS story is that they're now adding another 4 T6C Harvard single engine trainers to the MFTS fleet to soak up a bit more of the capacity that they've got there. The other story.
Just on this one, I just wanted to ask you. So, the mission planning systems. You mentioned a couple in your story, Prefect, I think, and Phenom.
Yeah.
How long have these systems been there for?
Inspire. That's a good question. Inspire released the Gecko system around about 4 years ago. I saw it in prototype form up at the company's headquarters in Lincoln, and then it was sold into the Royal Air Force originally, and quite a few fleets in the Royal Air Force use Inspire's Gecko system. And the great thing from the training perspective now is if the students are using Gecko in the training environment, it's going to be really easy then to transfer that knowledge to the Gecko in the operational environment. So in effect, Inspire, their product has closed that training gap.
Okay, thank you. So what's the other story?
Well, the other story, as we covered many times before, the Collective Training Transformation Programme in the UK, that's had what they call a Pathfinder Programme award, and that award has gone to Elbit UK, and they're going to be providing a system called the Interim Combined Arms Virtual Simulation Deployable, ICAVS-D. That basically is a virtual simulation environment where one can train everything from a vehicle crew all the way up to a all-arms company group body.
Remind us just what the Collective Training Transformation Programme is aiming to achieve overall.
Basically, it is looking at the British Army's live training environment and how CTTP can bring it together to coordinate all the various elements of that. Now, you might say, well, we've just talked about a virtual trainer. What's that got to do with live training? Well, it's exactly the same in the United States with their STE program, Synthetic Training Environment. To look at live in these days of integrated live virtual constructive, these things don't happen in a vacuum. So it sucks in, if you will, the CTTP, it sucks in virtual and constructive training into it. And it's basically looking at a complete transformation of how the British Army undertakes its training.
Thank you, Trevor. Ben, so a new freelancer has joined Shephard's list of contributors, Elizabeth Gosselin-Mallow, and her first piece this week is on Canada and Royal Canadian Air Force. So tell us about her story.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Noemi. Elizabeth filed her first piece, and it's been a while, actually, since Shephard covered the Canadian RPAS programme, so an update was welcome. For the benefit of any listeners who need their memories refreshed, the RPAS programme is an initiative in Canada to buy an armed medium-altitude long-endurance UAV. And there are two industry teams basically competing. One of them is led by L3 Harris Technologies, offering the Israeli-made Heron TP. And the other one is led by General Atomics, and they're offering their MQ-9B. Sky Guardian is called. Now, as with many big-ticket procurement programs, there's been a slight delay in the process. This is due partly to the effects of COVID-19, the knock-on economic impact. So a contract award is now due in 2024, delay of about 2 years. And the first of these armed UAVs for the Royal Canadian Air Force is due to be provided in about 2026, 2027.
Okay. Will this new UAV then replace a capability which is already in service, or will fill an existing capability gap?
It's actually would be a new capability for the Royal Canadian Air Force. An armed UAV is something that they've simply not operated before. Okay. They did lease some Herons when they were operating in Afghanistan a few years ago. But this is the first time, actually, that they will be fully owning this kind of capability. And I'd like to just add one other interesting aspect to the competition. Is it relates to the fact that the alliance between Canada and the US, as enshrined in NORAD, the NORAD agreement, that basically requires that any data processing from a system like a UAV has to be integrated with the intelligence sharing arrangements between Canada and the US. Now, how is this relevant to the UAV procurement? Well, there's that. And there's also the fact that it kind of implies that it would be a lot easier, simpler for Canada to buy the US platform rather than the Israeli one. But of course, both of these teams are still in contention, and a final decision, well, it's yet to be made.
Thanks, Ben. As you mentioned, it's not often that we talk about Canada in general, about this program on the podcast, so definitely a well worth mention. Back to Europe, and Harry, this week you wrote a story on the Royal Navy to begin concept work for its Type 83 destroyer. So what should we know about the plans on this for this platform?
Yes, so the Type 83 kind of came out the blue. In the Defence Command paper, the Royal Navy just said, we're buying this new destroyer in the late 2030s and it's going to replace the Type 45. So since then, obviously, everyone's been kind of scrambling for any information they can find about this new ship. And responding to a parliamentary question, the Defence Procurement Minister, Jeremy Quinn, announced that the concept phase for the development of the Type 83 would begin in early 2022. So it's obviously the very early formal beginnings of the programme for something that's going to be bought kind of into the late 2030s, but interesting nonetheless.
Okay, and I know you said that we don't know much about this yet, but I was just going to ask if we know anything at all about how differently the Royal Navy will approach the design of this new destroyer compared to its new Type 31 and Type 32 frigates.
Yeah, so at the Defence Committee on the 2nd of November, so last week, there was the First Sea Lord, DE&S Director General Ships Vice Admiral Chris Gardner, and the aforementioned Jeremy Quinn. And it did come up in the discussion. They kind of asked what the ship would be. And there was some discussion about how the Royal Navy is pursuing kind of more modular vessels. So the Type 31 and the Type 32, the idea is that you'll be able to, they've got plenty of space to take stuff off and on them and re-roll them kind of depending on what you need them to do. But Jeremy Quinn said that the Type 83 would be more exquisite. So it will be more of a bespoke platform rather than these kind of other more modular ships that the Royal Navy is looking to buy.
Thank you, Ari, for that quote. Exquisite. I like that word. Let's stay in the UK and talk about the Public Accounts Committee report with all of you. Last week, the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee released a paper which includes recommendations to the government, to the UK MOD, on how to improve the performance of major defence equipment contracts. It's worth mentioning that the government will have now 2 months from the 2nd of November, which is when the report was issued, to respond to it. Now, to just give a super quick idea of the tone, which I found really interesting, of this report and the main points made by the committee, the report says that the MOD system to deliver major equipment is broken and is wasting taxpayers' money. And the MPs say that they are deeply concerned about the fact that the MOD cannot answer basic questions because of its inability or unwillingness. And these, of course, are words from the report and not mine. So let's see how the concerns impact the domains and what programs and platforms are mentioned in this report. Trevor, I want to come to you first. What do you make of all of that?
I think I need to put it into context.
Okay.
And the context is there have been numerous reviews over the past 35 years about the way that the United Kingdom procures its defence equipment. And those have come from parliamentary committees and indeed from the National Audit Office. And this report is based on the most recent National Audit Office, NAO, report. I just want to read out a paragraph from this report in the summary, and this will give you an idea of the level of unbelief that the parliamentarians had about the way that we procure the equipment. And this is the quote. We are therefore extremely disappointed and frustrated by the continued poor track record of the department and its suppliers, including significant net delays of 21 years across the programmes most recently examined by the National Audit Office, and by wastage of taxpayers' money running into the billions. You could not make this up. And the reason I say that, it's not because of this current report, it's from the reports in the previous 35 years, where time after time, money's been wasted, equipment has not come into service on the given date that it was expected, programs have been cancelled, and often, with the case of a number of current programs, for instance, Ajax, Challenger 3, P8, and Type 26, because of budget shortfalls, fewer units come into service than were initially required. So it's a complete and utter damning report.
I know it's a difficult question, but just for you and everyone else who wants to answer it, why do you think all of this is happening, and where should we kind of try and find the causes?
I think, it has gone on for so long. In 2008, a chap called Bill Kincaid, Brigadier Bill Kincaid, was working at RUSI. He wrote an excellent book called Changing the Dinosaurs' Spots, The Battle to Reform UK Defence Acquisition. And back in 2008, I served with Bill in the army, he wrote of a stultifying culture in procurement. He wrote of a culture of optimism, and he wrote about risk aversion. And the report that's recently been published looks at a lack of training for the people that are involved in specifying equipment and actually procuring it. And I think what's probably worse is for each major program, you have an officer called a senior responsible owner who's in charge of that particular program. Now, the median time in post for those people is 22 months. And that person, the SRO, is not only responsible for a multi-billion-dollar project, let's say Ajax, but that person is also double-hatted. So they're carrying out another military job on top of the SRO job. I think that's one of the fundamental issues.
Okay. Ben, would you want to give your input on my question on why this is happening?
Yeah, I mean, everything that Trevor said, is absolutely correct. Of course it is. And in connection with that, I think the phrase is sunk cost fallacy, which basically means that so much time, effort and money gets invested in these various programs, and even the ones that incur delay after delay, at a fundamental sort of cultural level, there seems to be an assumption that there's no turning back. So much we've gone this far, so we've got to see it through. And essentially, it's a bit like the banks in the financial crisis. They were too big to fail, so they were bailed out. So perhaps these programs can be seen in the same light. They're too big to fail.
I was going to add to that, Ben, that, it's very interesting. This report has come hot on the heels of the armoured fighting vehicle report that came out in March. And in that report, again, it stated that the British armoured fighting vehicle capability is deplorable, and that there's this desire for immature technology over proven technology, and also, indecision around requirements. I'm not quite sure what it is. I mean, if one goes back to the old days, you had two separate organisations. You had the procurement executive and you had operational requirements. And the operational requirements boys, generally in uniform, would specify the equipment. And then the PE, generally speaking, civilians, but with a good sprinkling of uniforms in there, would actually get on with procuring the system. And that seemed to work better than the current system.
Harry, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it just seems like there's I don't know if it's a combination of poor long-term planning and just a lack of a necessary skills base in order to kind of plan, execute and deliver these huge contracts. I mean, if you take the Ajax example, that started life back a long time ago as Tracer, which became Scout SV, which eventually became Ajax. And that now you're looking at kind of 20 plus years for that program. And it was Ajax. The Ajax alone portion is meant to be worth £5.5 billion. And like Trevor mentioned earlier, that had a part-time SRO. It's a £5.5 billion project, essentially being managed by a part-time person. If you had that kind of in any other profession, it'd be utterly bizarre that much money and something that important is being looked after by one person who isn't actually spending their whole time on it. And I think as we see often with MOD procurement, there's a tendency to shift projects to the right and delay things to make the budget for that year work and pay for what's needed at the time. But the more you shift things back, you're just shifting problems down the line, and that leads to these issues where delays build up and costs overruns continue because you're cutting the amount of capabilities down. So if you've got a procurement of, say, 1,000 vehicles and then you cut that to 750 and cut it to 500, you're losing the economies of scale that drive production costs down that you originally wanted. And if you keep shifting programs over into next year without thinking of the long-term consequences of what's going to happen 10 years down the line when we have less capability and less money, you're just in a constant cycle where nothing ever seems to improve.
You know, and to be totally cynical about what you said there, Harry, I believe that there are people in jobs for a certain amount of times and they haven't got a long-term view of what happens down the line. They're out of the job, they're going on another promotion train, and it's not my problem anymore. And it's the classic rugby hospital pass.
I think, Trevor, that point you make about people only being in post for a short time, it does bear repeating. And there's also, isn't there a revolving door between the poachers and the gamekeepers, so to speak? The gamekeepers in the MOD going off to join industry after a certain amount of time. And in a sense, there's not enough demarcation between government and industry in these procurement processes. I mean, if I was to be really cynical, I'd say there are plenty of potential conflicts of interest at play, which could feed into these problems in terms of delays and cost spiralling.
So, based on your observations, then I just wanted to follow up with the question. So, obviously, delays keep happening, programs keep being cancelled or postponed. So, would you say that probably in the next report, then we are likely to see the same thing over and over again?
I've got two words to say: Groundhog Day.
Nice. What is it? It's a movie from the 90s, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And we're getting towards that time of year, festive movie.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, the clerks at the Public Accounts Committee can just do Control-C and Control-V and just change the date at the top, because what they've published this year seems to be the same as what they published last year. And as Trevor mentioned with that National Audit Office report, it's the same thing every time. So the only difference is the MOD got this big 24 billion cash settlement, kind of funding some new capabilities. Also, when they did announce it, they kind of recommitted to funding things they already apparently had funding for. But maybe that will go some way to fill the equipment plan black hole. And then maybe we might see the MOD having a bit of a fresh start. But that might be wishful thinking on my part.
Okay, thank you. Flavia, on the land side, there are two major programs for the British. One of them is no longer there. For the British Land Forces, I mean, they have been impacted in the spending review and integrated review earlier in March. I'm talking obviously about the Ajax and Warrior. Ajax doesn't have a time frame for delivery, and Warrior was totally scrapped. So, in what way does the Public Account Committee then address this issue and mentions these two pillar programs?
Yeah, in the case of the Ajax, it claims the program is a catastrophe. And the report notes the department is not sufficiently open about the progress and the risks involved in the Ajax program. I think it's interesting to highlight that it was expected this program reaching the initial operating capability in June this year, but it didn't happen due to the ongoing investigations into noise and vibration issues related to this platform. Now, the report stresses that there is no time scale for when these vehicles will be ready for service. And it also points out that the Army imposed restrictions on the use of the Ajax due to vibration issues in December 2018. And now, currently, the potential long-term health implications of this failure remain unknown.
It sounds like a catastrophe for sure.
Yeah, and then regarding the Warrior, the report says the department has spent over £508 million on the program by the time of its cancellation, and has never reached a view on whether its proposed approach continued value for money. And the report also mentions that both Warrior and Ajax are examples of failing to appreciate the degree of technical complexity involved in delivering the capabilities.
Oh, nice. Does anyone have anything to add to that? No. Thanks all for your precious insights today. And for our listeners, of course, if you have a different opinion on any of the topics we discussed today or want to share your perspective on things or even ask questions to the Shephard News team, you can leave a comment down below on whatever platform you are joining us from. You can also visit our website, shepherdmedia.com/news for more stories, previous episodes of the podcast, and more. Time now for a quick message from our sponsor, and we will be back in a minute for Ben's chat with our Asia Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, on all the news from his region. Protecting Earth, surveilling space, enabling the mission. That is what Raytheon Technologies' early warning radar delivers. Unmatched range of 5,000 kilometers to simultaneously detect and track ballistic missile threats, distinguish between actual attacks and objects that pose no threat, while also conducting space surveillance. Early warning radar from Raytheon Technologies. A proven, modernized solution. A critical element for effective missile defense. Learn more at rtx.com/EWR.
Hello and welcome back to our regular instalment of Asia Pacific News with our regional expert, Gordon Arthur. Hello, Gordon. How are you?
Hi there, Ben. Good to talk to you again.
Yes, it's been a while, so it's nice to be back in the podcast. Well, it's been another eventful month for Asia Pacific defence news with new technology and policy developments galore. But there's a strong Chinese theme this time. So I thought we'd start with your story, Gordon, about a US DoD report on China's ambition to, quote, fight and win wars, which I imagine most militaries want to do. But there's a special Pentagon report on that. So what's the salient point, would you say, or points of the Pentagon analysis?
Yeah, we've been eagerly looking forward to the release of this report. So as you say, it comes out every year. This is the 21st year in a row that it's been published by the Pentagon. So it was published on the 3rd of November. And I think if you're asking for a salient point, I think the key takeaway relates to the Chinese nuclear weapon stockpile. And there are quite astounding estimates given by the DoD. So, for example, by 2027, it estimates China will have 700 nuclear warheads, which is up from the current figure and somewhere in the low 200s. And by the end of this decade, 1,000 nuclear warheads. So that's a huge expansion. I mean, between now and 2030, it's going to multiply 4 times. So that's a pretty serious expansion of the Chinese nuclear force. Another point related to that is that China has pretty much established a nuclear triad. So that means it can launch ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads from land, sea, and air. And that includes the Type 094 submarines and also a new air-launched ballistic missile from H-6N bombers. So according to the US, those are all pretty much operationally fielded now.
So this is clearly a very serious problem for the United States. China, head and shoulders above any other peer or near peer adversary. So there is a problem, and the US appears to at least be recognising this. But in practical terms, what can the US actually do to address this issue of a bulked up Chinese nuclear force?
Well, of course, at the end of the day, the US is still going to have a lot more nuclear weapons than China does. So I think the US at the moment, something around about 5,800 nuclear warheads. So if China has 1,000, I mean, it's still, the US is significantly ahead. But I think it also points to the fact that China is concerned about the US ballistic missile defense network. So perhaps it sees the need to have more nuclear weapons and an ability to counterstrike. So more weapons could do that because it's concerned about what the US is doing. But then you get into the cycle of action and reaction, don't you? Where one side does this and the other side does that, and it just sort of continues to spiral upwards and upwards. I think for me that the concerning thing is China is basically so opaque. I mean, it's not admitting that it's doing this. So open source intelligence plus the Pentagon are all confirming that there's a huge increase in nuclear weapons, but China fails to acknowledge that and fails to acknowledge that it is a concern to the US and to its neighbours and to pretty much everyone in the world. So for me, that's the point. Why is the China so secretive? And it obviously points to a major policy shift. In fact, this Pentagon report, instead of minimum deterrence, it now calls China's approach that of limited deterrence. So definitely a policy shift.
While the expansion of the Chinese nuclear arsenal is doubtless alarming, there is also a considerable element of aggression in terms of expansion of Chinese conventional forces, isn't there, in this particular report? So what does the report actually say in terms of the conventional military?
Yeah, so I think the PLA Navy was probably the second most interesting aspect, and that's the sheer number of ships that the PLA is building and fielding. So according to the report, China now has 355 vessels in its force. That's major combatants, so excluding sort of patrol boats and smaller craft. And the US expects China will actually reach 460 vessels by the end of the decade.
Far in excess of the USN.
Oh, it's already the largest navy. It's already got the largest coast guard. It's already got the largest maritime militia in the world. So China is ahead, certainly in terms of hull numbers. Navy, a huge shipbuilding effort going on there. The ground force, I mean, we know that last year they had a big confrontation with India. So they're continuing to work towards their mechanization and different targets. The Marine Corps, perhaps not so much, because they've established 4 new brigades and they're sort of been operationalized. So they may have missed those particular mechanization targets. So lots happening also in terms of satellites. 80 more satellites this year compared to last year. And the US estimates China has more than 200 satellites in orbit, at least half used for military purposes.
Are there any aspects of Chinese military expansion that haven't been implemented quite as successfully as Beijing would have wanted? Because at the moment it just seems to be an unalloyed sort of picture of success as far as China being able to implement its plans is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, China would like to paint a picture that everything is progressing wonderfully, and you may as well just give up now because it's inevitable that China's just going to be victorious. So, of course, no one can. We can't fall into that trap. PLA still has the largest is still the largest military in the world, but there are particular issues that remain. Anti-submarine warfare, for example, China's making big efforts to improve that. That does remain a weakness. And one of the comments about the ground force in the report, it said the ground force remains a relative laggard within the PLA in terms of modernization. So, yeah, lots happening in the Air Force, lots happening in the Navy, missile force, but perhaps the ground force is missing out on a bit of the action compared to some of the other forces.
Okay, so finally, final question on this Pentagon report. In summary, what's the outlook for the US and its various allies in the Asia Pacific region, especially, of course, Taiwan, which is most vulnerable of all to a Chinese invasion?
Yeah, there's a recurring date that comes through the report, and that's the year 2027. So US officials have been talking about this date. It also appears several times in the report. It's sort of a time when different things will converge, when the PLA has different capabilities. So that's a time to watch. I think the threat for Taiwan continues to grow, and a lot of what the PLA is doing in terms of modernization is all aimed at threatening Taiwan. So now more than ever, I think the US and its allies need to sort of bolster their capabilities and their forces to deter China from making any untoward moves toward Taiwan. Just to give you a little quote that probably sums up the view being expressed in the USA at the moment. It said, China is increasingly clear in its ambitions and intentions. Beijing seeks to reshape the international order to better align with its authoritarian system and national interests as a vital component of its strategy to achieve the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. And then it goes on to say China's basically looking to accrue military power and set the conditions to assert its preferences on a global scale. So China, I think big clarion warning call from this particular report. I think more than any other report before this one, it's warning of a threat from China.
Okay, well, the warning is loud and clear, and let's hope the Biden administration is paying close enough attention. Staying in China, Gordon, you reported recently on a sighting of what appears to be the world's first twin-seat stealth fighter. So can you shed a bit more light on that story?
Yeah, I mean, this is a story that, all these aircraft nerds and aficionados get all excited about. People have been waiting for this for months. And finally, at the end of October, we saw the first images and video of a twin-seat J-20 fighter. Of course, the J-20 is China's premier fighter. It's a sort of a fifth-generation stealth design. China's basically said nothing about this occurrence so far. We don't even know its exact designation. Some people are calling it the J20B. If it was designed as a trainer, it will be the J20S, although I think we're pretty clear that it's not a trainer aircraft. So perhaps the J20AS will be the eventual designation for this fighter. It performed a high-speed taxi test on the 26th of October, around about that date. I think the interesting thing is, what is its purpose then? If it's not a trainer, what will it be used for? So different speculation, because China's not going to tell us itself. All we have to do is speculate. So different ideas, perhaps air-to-ground combat, electronic warfare, perhaps command and control missions. And I think an interesting one, and certainly it's something that China has been pursuing, is using it as basically a control or command aircraft for unmanned systems. So this is your
loyal wingman.
Exactly. So these sort of aircraft that would accompany the J20, perhaps use them for other functions. They could be controlled within the J20 by the second crewman. So certainly that would, to me, would be the most logical idea at the moment. But certainly, China's now got an aircraft that no one else has, a twin-seat fifth generation fighter. Of course, still a number of years yet before it's fully developed and enters service.
Right. Well, I wonder if the United States will try and turn the tables on the Chinese a bit, because Chinese military has a reputation for stealing other people's technology and design. So perhaps somebody in US intelligence is thinking about that right now. Meanwhile, China has also developed a carrier-borne stealth fighter. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about its role and capabilities.
Pretty much just a few days after we saw the J20 do a taxi, then the fifth generation, I guess we call it a fifth generation fighter destined for PLA Navy aircraft carrier operations, it took to the sky on its maiden flight. So this is an aircraft from the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, based on the FC-31 fighter that we first saw around about 2012. And it's been heavily modified so that it can perform flights and landings and takeoffs, etc., from an aircraft carrier. So, lots of things happening in terms of Chinese aerospace at the moment, Ben.
And of course, there's a related expansion in the Chinese fleet, as you've mentioned before. China is building more aircraft carriers at the moment. That's correct to say, isn't it?
Yeah, so the key thing about this particular fighter is it's designed for catapult operations. So the first two carriers that China has obviously have a ski jump. Aircraft like the J-15 will operate from them, whereas the third aircraft carrier, the Type 003, that will have a catapult, electromagnetic launch system. So this is obviously what the new aircraft is designed for, the third carrier onwards.
Well, all in all, having discussed these various Chinese-specific stories, it does seem to be a rather dispiriting outlook for everybody else in the Asia-Pacific. And, I return to the question, as it were, that I asked in the Pentagon report section. When it comes to all these developments and, twin-seat stealth fighter, carrier-borne stealth fighter, neither of which I imagine were on display at the Zhuhai exhibition, kept firmly under wraps. And, with these constant surprises, how on earth will China's neighbours be able to cope? I mean, what's coming next, I suppose, they must be wondering.
Yeah, I did talk to someone just recently, Ben, and he warned we're going to have a string of sort of surprises and startling things happening in China in terms of new weapons and systems and equipment and so on. So, yeah, we just need to brace ourselves for it. And for too long, I think many countries have been had their heads in the sand and been ignoring the rising danger that China is posing to countries like Taiwan and its immediate neighbours.
And those neighbours include South Korea. So we'll move away from China now and look at some shipbuilding developments in South Korea. You've covered them recently in your stories. So what's going on, and why is the pace been picking up there?
Yeah, I think South Korea doesn't get the attention it deserves. I mean, it does have a very powerful navy, and it has a huge shipbuilding industry, so both commercial and naval, and pretty much all its naval vessels are built in South Korea. And so I had a story the other week just sort of listing some of the different projects and programs that are underway at the moment. And I mean, it's quite impressive. So at the moment, for example, they have a submarine rescue vessel being built, and it should be finished middle of 2023. And that's particularly important. I mean, you remember the loss of the Indonesian submarine earlier this year. So many countries keen to get submarines, but of course you need to have the appropriate rescue vessels to help if things go wrong. So this is a second submarine rescue vessel for the South Korean Navy. Also, contracts continue to be awarded for different submarines, and Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, they've just received in September a contract to build the second KSS-3 Batch 2 submarine. So these are submarines that use lithium-ion batteries, and it should be finished around about 2028. So 3 submarines in Batch 1, there'll be 3 submarines in Batch 2. Interestingly, once this submarine is completed, it will be the 22nd submarine that DSME has built. So that's a pretty impressive record. That's since the late 1980s. Also, a keel was laid early October for the first KDX-3 Batch 2 guided missile destroyer. So that's another project. These destroyers displace 8,300 tons, optimized for ballistic missile defense with the Aegis combat system. So that'll be coming in due course. We also have a modernization program on the KDX-1 destroyers that's just recently been completed. Also, frigates. There's a whole lot going on in frigates too, Ben. The 6th Daegu-class frigate that was launched in September, and there'll be another 2 coming in this particular class, which is called the FFX Batch 2. So 8 frigates coming there. After this, South Korea won't be content to stop there. It's moving on to Batch 3, the Ulsan class frigates, and even the Batch 4 as well.
So clearly South Korea is a hive of activity at the moment, and you've just...
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely stunning how much it's actually building.
And
but there is a problem there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking that you've listed a number of programs for submarines and surface vessels, all of which are crewed rather than uncrewed or unmanned. So given that South Korea, like Japan, as another example in the region, has this kind of demographic problem of an aging population and a low birth rate, and is manpower the basic fly in the ointment when it comes to South Korean naval expansion? And in association with that problem, is a lot of work being put into USVs and UUVs?
Yeah, so as you say, this personnel issue is pretty serious because South Korea does have an aging population, a lower birth rate. It relies heavily on national conscription, and for things like the Army or the Marine Corps, conscripts have to serve 18 months compulsory military service. It's actually longer for the Navy. They have to do a couple of extra months, so 20 months of service if you end up in the Navy. So there is a manpower crunch occurring in South Korea. Of course, apart from conscription and a smaller pool of people, military is also competing with the private sector, who probably pay a lot more, and also are not quite so demanding, perhaps, of your time and energy as the military would. So, as you rightly say, unmanned systems and mechanization are some of the ways that South Korea is planning to sort of circumvent some of these restrictions that it's facing. So certainly in terms of USVs, UAVs, South Korea is very active in the UAV field. Also UGVs, so we saw unmanned ground vehicles at the Seoul ADEX show last month. So there's a lot happening in that sector, and that's, as I said, that's just one way of overcoming the shortage of personnel.
And staying in South Korea as a kind of final story that we can talk about, you talked about construction programs, but also naval weapon systems. There have been some developments in South Korea with the selection of a winning bid for a new close-in weapons system. So can you explain a bit more about that, Gordon?
Yeah, I think this is worthy of a quick mention. So right at the end of October, the Defence Acquisition Program Administration announced that LIG Next One, which is a South Korean company whose name just slips off the tongue, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It announced that this company had won a contract to develop and manufacture the CIWS for various naval vessels for the ROK Navy. So it was competing with Hanwha Systems. So there's basically two South Korean companies competing for this, and LIG Next One has won that. It'll be able to use some of its experience from maintaining existing systems, such as the Thales Goalkeeper that the South Korean Navy already has. It's overhauled those. And it's also going to have an ASA radar. And so that'll use some of the technology it's been developing for the KF-21 fighter that KAI has been developing. So that's certainly a feather in the cap for LIG Next One, to win that contract.
And is this system sort of fully indigenous, developed in South Korea entirely, 100%? Or is there some kind of element where the winning bidder, whose name I can't pronounce very well, does that draw on expertise from foreign partners in terms of the winning design?
Yeah, the representative from DAPA, he said basically by securing our own technology through this project, it will greatly help our Navy's operations and create export opportunities and enhance the competitiveness of military science and technology and defence industry. So most, I think, predominantly, it will be indigenous technology that the company will use. But I believe they will look to overseas partner or partners for some assistance.
Yeah, South Korea will be working very hard on that. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Gordon. It's good to speak to you again.
A pleasure. Thanks, Ben.
For over 40 years, Shephard has led the defence and aerospace sector with magazines, equipment handbooks, and cutting-edge news stories. Shephard now champions the best business information and marketing solutions across digital, so your business can have the decisive edge in everything you do. Make your team the competitive advantage. Partner with Shephard today. Get in touch with one of our customer experts to discuss your needs at shepherdmedia.com.
This episode of the Weekly Defense Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Raytheon Missiles and Defense. As always, a big thanks to everyone who took the time of being with us today. For our listeners, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Until next week, thanks for listening.